Okay, thank you everyone for joining. Tonight, in tonight's hands-on halacha class, we are going to continue our discussion that we started the past 2 weeks on the topic of the early morning. And as I've mentioned to you in the past, it's not necessarily a topic of early morning, but perhaps you could call it a late morning, discussing what happens when sunrise gets later and later. How do we cope with that halachically? With all the different mitzvahs that we have to do in the early morning, which have, certain specific times to them. So we spoke about hand washing, netilas yadayim. Regarding netilas yadayim, just the bottom line was, you wash your hands as soon as you wake up, and then and that's when you make your bracha. And if you are able, and if you remember, it is ideal to wash your hands a second time after daybreak. That is alos hashachar, not sunrise. That's earlier. Then we moved on and we discussed the mitzvah of tzitzis. The mitzvah of tzitzis is later than daybreak. The ideal time for the mitzvah of tzitzis is misha yakir, which is that middle time where you have enough light that you could see an acquaintance at a distance of 4 amos. And there, when it came to tzitzis, and we had the Ramah, the Ashkenazic authorities say that you could even make the bracha after daybreak. And then last week we spoke about tefillin, and tefillin is the same time frame as tzitzis. That's mishiyakir. It's that time frame in between daybreak and sunrise, where you have a little bit of sunlight, but not a lot. Enough sunlight that you could see your fellow at a distance of 4 amos. And there, we pointed out that there are certain exceptions to the rule where you would be allowed to put on your tefillin even earlier, but you should not make a bracha earlier than that time frame of mishiyakir. Okay, and I believe we spoke about last time. Did we give a definition to mishiyakir last time? I don't know if we did that yet.
I'm not sure.
Let's do a quick, you know what? No, let's talk about Shema, and then we'll come back to that because it's relevant to Shema as well. Okay, so tonight, I want to move on, continue along the list, and let's talk about the mitzvah of Shema. So we know that we have a mitzvah to recite Kriya Shema. That's a Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and then the 3 paragraphs that follow, Ve'ohavta V'hoyim Shemoa, and Vayomer and Vayidaber Tzitzis. Those are the 3 paragraphs. Now, the mitzvah of Shema is both morning and night. And what is the definition of morning? If you do it too early, then it's not really the morning anymore. It's nighttime. So that is what we need to discuss. This, by the way, these 2 times that we recite Shema are derived from the verse in Shema itself, B'shachbecha uvikumecha. B'shachbecha, when you lie down, uvikumecha, and when you get up. And you'll see that that source is quite relevant. So the Shulchan Aruch, this is now in Siman Nun Ches, 58, where the Shulchan Aruch discusses the timing for the mitzvah of Shema. Zman Kriya Shema shel Shachar Mishiyas Chavero Haragulim U'Kitzas B'Yichud Galanamos V'Akirenu. The earliest time for Shema, says the Shulchan Aruch, is the same time for Talis and Tefillin. How convenient. The time frame when it's between daybreak and sunrise, in between the 2, where you have enough light that you can recognize an acquaintance at a distance of 4 amos. The nimshach zmana ad sof gimel shows that time frame continues until the end of the 3rd hour of the day, shurivia hayom, which is a quarter of the day. Okay, mitzvah menamufra the kreisa kivasikin. There is the ideal, the most choice way to perform the mitzvah is kivasikin. So again, the earliest time is mishiyakir. The latest time is a quarter into the day and daylight. And the ideal time is kivasikin, like the vasikin, which means, people that really love mitzvahs. Now, how did the vasikin do it? They would recite Shema just a little bit before sunrise, in order that they should complete the Shema and its brachos right before sunrise, and then go connect the Shema to the Shemona Esrei right at that moment of sunrise. And the Shulchan Aruch adds here something that you do not commonly see. Someone who is able to get that time, their reward is very great. Very interesting. So this is the idea of a Sikin minion or a Nate's minion. And the idea is that they time things out such that they should be completing Shema and its brachos right as they hit sunrise, and then transition immediately from Shema into Shemona Esrei at that moment. Okay, so that is the idea in terms of the earliest time of Shema. Now, just to give a brief moment to something which is not really tonight's topic, but rather the topic of the latest time for Shema, which most of the year, this is the more relevant discussion. It's very relevant on Shabbos, where typically people daven Shachos a little bit later. Let me just pull that up for you right now on the Maizmanim. I'm going to try to share my screen with you. Give me a second, please. Okay, there it is. So here we have, this is today, Tuesday, in Cincinnati. Here is dawn, daybreak, at 5:54. Earliest Talis and Tefillin, they have at 6:25. Sunrise, 7:16. Latest Shema. Now, if you look at latest Shema, you're going to find something interesting. Latest Shema, Mogen Avraham. Latest Shema, Gra and Balatanya. And there's a very significant difference between the two, an entire 41 minutes. We have 9:07 versus 9:48. So this would be the latest time to recite Shema to this morning was 9:48. When the clocks changed, it jumped up an hour. It was very late, and then all of a sudden it got early. So that's an important thing to remain aware of. 9:48. Now, what is the reason for these two times, Mogen Avram and Gra? The reason is, do you calculate the 3 hours, meaning the quarter of the day, from daybreak or from sunrise? That is the machlokes. So the Mogen Avram is counting as 3 hours starting from daybreak. Now, when I say 3 hours, I mean sho'os manios. I mean halachic hours, which means you take your daylight hours and you divide them by 12. That's how long it is. Let's see if they have it on this page. No, it's not here. Nightfall, 72 minutes. They have something where they will actually display how long shows manios are on any given day, which is a very cool feature.
Isn't it usually at the bottom?
Yeah, but all's mine. That's what I need to do. There we go. Now you scroll down and nope. Yeah, shows manios are 50 minutes and 54 seconds. That's how long shows manios are. So when I say 3 hours, I mean this times 3 would be how you calculate it for today. Now note that they say according to the Gra. That's based on the same machlokes I'm about to tell you now. There's a machlokes between the Gra and the Mogen Avraham, two of the leading later halachic authorities, about whether you count your day in terms of calculating these times from daybreak or from sunrise. So the Gra counted from sunrise, which is why it ends up being significantly later, 9:48, as opposed to the Mogen Avraham, who counts it at 9:07, which is working from daybreak. Okay, so there you go. Let me go back to the simplified page. So that's in terms of the latest time for Shema. So now let's continue in terms of the earliest time for Shema. So we spoke about this figure right here, 6:25. That's what we call Misha Yakir. So now the Shulchan Aruch continues with something very important. Sorry, excuse me. So here's a really important detail. Mishu anus, someone who is forced, who is in a difficult situation. He needs to get up early to go traveling in a place that's dangerous. It has bandits, it has wild animals, and etc. He can't hang around there. And he doesn't have time while he's traveling to even recite the first parsha of Shema. Or if the caravan is not willing to stop for him. He could recite it as early as Amud HaShachar. That's the earliest time that you could do Shema if a person is in a difficult situation. Once you've hit daybreak, you could technically call that Uvekumecha, the time that you get up. Or you could call that Yotor. However, writes the Shulchan Aruch, even if you're traveling, but if you're not in a dangerous spot and you're not in a scenario where you're worried about a caravan that's not going to stop for you, then what you should do is you should leave. And then when you get to Mishiyakir or later, then you should pause on your trip and then recite Shema. That's the ideal way to do it. The Shulchan Aruch adds one more thing. If you said it before this time, you said it at daybreak, and you didn't realize that was too early, Yotze b'diavad. You do not have to repeat it. That's acceptable. Okay. So let's pause here for a second. So the bottom line, what we're learning is that the ideal time for Shema is after this time of Mishiyakir. In difficult situations, you could push it all the way up to dawn, to Alos HaShachar. But that is, and even if you're not in a difficult situation, but you did it by accident, as long as you're after this time, it's fine, that's acceptable. Okay? Now, an important thing to point out is the Mishnah Berurah and other poskim point out, the Rav Moshe Feinstein makes this very clear, that even though the Shulchan Aruch gave the example of someone who's traveling and is in a dangerous location or the caravan won't stop for him, that's one example. Any other scenario where a person is tight on time and really needs to say Shema as early as possible, they could push it all the way up to here. And that would be, and Rav Moshe says, certainly someone who needs to get to work and it's difficult to do that, then he could do it as early as this time. Now today is not a great example of this, but if we turn back to before we changed the clocks, when did we change it? Let's just take a look at this. Ouch. Now 7:13 is what we're looking at for Mishiyakir. For a lot of working people, they've got to be on the road by 7 o'clock. So that's where this really comes in to be significant. The tricky thing will be, how do you do a talis and tefillin in that scenario? So that's something that we'll get to soon. But let's zero in on Shema and try to make sure that we totally cover the discussion of Shema. So what is the reasoning for this? The Mishnah Berurah explains something very interesting. And he says that we derive the time for Shema from the word ubikumecha, when you get up. So he says, so the Mishnah Berurah quotes from much earlier sources, authoritative sources, that your average person doesn't get up until there's at least a little bit of light. And therefore, the ideal time, the ideal ubikumecha, the ideal time that people are getting up is Mishiyakir, when there's at least a little bit of light such that you could see an acquaintance at a distance of 4 amos. However, some people are already getting out of bed at Alos HaShachar. Bakers at Mark's Hot Bagel are getting up even earlier than this. I said that for someone on the call. That's why it's important to remember that. And that's why this is acceptable, but because that's still called ubikumech. That can still be deemed when people are getting up. But because it's not when most people get up, it's the ideal time is a little bit later, Mishiyakir. Okay, now there's one more halacha about Shema, which is really, really interesting. In Ne'enas, v'lo kriya Shema arvis. Let's say somebody forgot to say the nighttime Shema. So they're planning on going to they normally say daven mincha marav at sunset, and this time for some reason they weren't able to do it, so they daven mincha early. And their plan was to daven marav at the late minyan. Let's say in Cincinnati, the kolol minyan at 9:50, and then because it's not their regular routine, they just forgot to go and they went to bed. Very likely scenario, very common scenario. And then they wake up at 5:30 in the morning and they say, or no, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. They wake up at 6 in the morning on Tuesday and they say, oy vavoy, I didn't say Shema last night. This is terrible, right? Says the Shulchan Aruch, a really fascinating halacha. And then as a person makes a mistake and it was against his will, and he did not recite the nighttime Shema until he already hit Alus HaShachar, which is dawn. The halacha is, Kivin Shadayin lo hinetachama, since the sun did not yet come up, Kore Kriya Shema, the Yosbe de Chayvas Kriya Shema Arvis. He could recite the Shema and fulfill his obligation for the nighttime Shema. So this time frame in between dawn and sunrise, as far as Shema is concerned, is somewhat of a twilight zone. And we're able to borrow that and treat it as the night if someone accidentally did not recite the nighttime Shema. I'm sorry, go ahead. Chaim, what was that?
Doesn't it say in Brachos the time is Alus HaShachar? That's the deadline.
No, 1 second. Sham b'Gemara Daf Ches, the Pishman ve'Rambam Sham. I would have to pull up my Gemara, but the Ber HaGola says that the Shulchan Aruch is taking this straight out of the Gemara in Brachos and Daf Ches, according to the Rif and the Rambam. Again, this is only nenas. This is someone who something happened out of their control; they weren't able to do it.
Right.
Okay, continues the Shulchan Aruch. So you could, if someone was nana, someone missed the Kriya Shema at nighttime, they could borrow this time frame and they could recite the Shema as long as it's before sunrise. Now listen to this amazing thing. If a person's in a tight situation during that time, he's got to get on the road in a place where it's dangerous. He should not try to double dip. He shouldn't also recite the daytime Shema before sunrise. Because once he made this into night, he can't go ahead and make it into day. Follow that? So says the Shulchan Aruch. This fellow had overslept, and that, or not overslept, he missed Marav by accident, totally out of his control. And then he wakes up in the morning and it's after dawn, and he realizes Oy Vavoy, and he quickly recites Shema to make it up for the night. Even if he's in a tight situation where he's got to get on the road before 7:16, before sunrise, he should not be reciting the daytime Shema in this time frame as well. Because once he made this kind of twilight zone, if you will, this dawn to sunrise time, once he deemed it night by using it as the time to recite his nighttime Shema, he's not allowed to simultaneously treat it as daytime and recite the daytime Shema in that time frame.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Chaim.
Is since this time is considered a twilight time, why does Magen Avraham hold that it's morning? Because we have just at the other end of the day, there's a question of when nighttime starts. We don't say Shema until after Teisach Chochavim.
Right. So again, what your question is that we don't seem to be within Vadai, within a frame, a time frame of being certain that it's the day until sunrise. So why would the Magen Avraham count from Alus HaShachar? Okay, so I don't know if I have a total answer for you, Chaim, but I'll share with you a little more to the story, which I think helps a lot regarding your question. And that is the Mishnah Berurah explains what is the reason for this. So I described it as a twilight. That's not perfectly accurate, because the way the Mishnah Berurah explains this halacha of reciting the nighttime Shema in between these two times is, he writes, Umixas anoshim yeshenim ba'osa hazman. Dekach b'shasatcha karina bei gam kein ubishach b'cha. Because there are some people who are still sleeping after daybreak, after dawn. They're still in bed. Therefore, in an ones, in a scenario where you have no other way to get in your nighttime Shema, we can consider this still within the time frame of the nighttime Shema of ubishach b'cha, when you lie down. You follow that?
Right.
So what I'm getting at is that in terms of calculating the hours of the day, it's possible that the Magen Avraham will tell you that there's no question that once you hit dawn, once you hit daybreak, it's definitely the day, without a question.
But it's
not night. What?
It's still dark out at dawn.
There's very little light, but the light of the sun is starting to show through over the horizon. So that's already
Right,
day.
but when the sun's setting, there's still light. So why do we wait until Teisach Chochavim if the light's already going away?
Let me think for a second. You're saying, no, what do you mean? That makes sense. We're still going to treat a day as day until Teisach Chochavim, until all the light is totally gone.
It just seems like a transitory period to me that it just seems a little early to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you in that regard. But in terms of the asking from the example of Kriya Shema, I think the answer to that is that the Magen Avraham would tell you that no, the day doesn't start until Alus HaShachar, until dawn. Sorry, it's definitely daytime once you hit dawn. But as far as Shema is concerned, we're not totally focused on day versus night. We're focused on in bed versus out of bed, when you're still sleeping versus when you're out of bed. So in regards to that, it's legitimate to argue that plenty of people are still in bed after dawn. So that's I think that might help your question. Okay, and just for the record, the Mishnah Berurah says that even though the Shulchan Aruch says you can't double dip, you can't do both the nighttime Shema and the daytime Shema in this time frame of between dawn and sunrise. However, he quotes a number of authorities, the Eliyah Rabbah and the Bir Hagra, who both say it's okay. You could do that. You could double dip, which is pretty amazing, pretty phenomenal, pretty shocking. Okay. Alrighty, so that is it as far as the earliest time for Shema is concerned. So now, you know what? Before we move on, does anyone have any questions about this topic? Because it's almost 9 o'clock. And I don't think I'm going to have time to do justice to the next thing that we need to discuss, which is putting it all together. And you have talis, you have tefillin, you have shema. How do I, what do I do in each scenario? How do I put it all together? That I think we're going to have to say for next week. But we could start. Let's start tonight. Let's start tonight. There's one important thing. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva on this topic. It's in Orach Chaim Chelik Dalet. It's in Siman Vav, and there he has a tshuva where he discusses, the clocks change and it messes up all the timing of everything, and now people need to get to work, and they don't have enough time to do everything for Talis and Tefillin and Shema. What are they supposed to do? That was essentially the question that was asked to Rav Moshe. So Rav Moshe discusses this topic and says a number of very interesting things. So the first thing that Rav Moshe deals with is that, as we just discovered, the earliest possible time for Shema is dawn, is Alos HaShachar. So the first thing that Rav Moshe deals with is, how do you calculate Alos HaShachar? When is dawn? So this is a very interesting topic. And the point that's critical to remember is that we're always going to work backwards from sunrise. The discussion will be, how far back do we work from sunrise? So there's one Gemara that Rav Moshe quotes, which is kind of the source of it all, which is a Gemara in Maseches Pesachim, and Daf Tzadi Dalet Aleph 94a. And there the Gemara says, the conclusion of the Gemara is, the amount of time working backwards from sunrise until dawn is 4 mil. 4 mil. Now, mil, the word mil, mem yud lamed, that's an Aramaic word that comes up in the Gemara a number of times. A mil is actually a measurement of linear distance, and it's used by the Talmud to refer to an amount of time, because a mil refers to the amount of time to walk that distance. That's the idea of a mil. 4 mil. Now, one more detail. To understand why we're always working backwards from sunrise, it's fairly simple. That's because sunrise is the easiest physically noticeable time, meaning it's self-evident. You can see it with your eyes. You know when it's happening. So that's something that we use as an anchor to build out the rest of the Zmanim from, because that's something that's very clear, very visible and measurable. So that's why we work backwards. Now, 4 mil is a question how long a mil is, and that's where Rav Moshe begins. The classic authority opinion is the Shach, that a mil is 18 minutes, which means that Alos HaShachar would be 72 minutes before sunrise. That's the classic amount of time for Alos HaShachar, for daybreak, is 72 minutes before sunrise. Rav Moshe, however, Rav Moshe brings up the opinion of the Rambam, who has an opinion that a mil is significantly more than 18 minutes. It's not clear exactly. He says approximately 2/5 of an hour, which a fifth of an hour, 60 minutes, is 12 minutes times 2 would be 24 minutes. That would be very long, 24 minutes. There is debate about exactly how long the Rambam's mil is. The conclusion of Rav Moshe is to go with 22.5 minutes, which would yield that times 4 would make dawn 90 minutes before sunrise. So that's why, if you notice, when we went to the expanded version, where did it go here? For Alzman, and I click this thing. All of a sudden we have 90 minutes, 5:35, much earlier. So that's So that is the story. Those are the two opinions of Rav Moshe. Now, if you'll notice here, there's 72 minutes fixed, 72 minutes as degrees. So that's something a little more involved that we're going to have to get into next week's class. But that's the critical point that the Rav Moshe makes, that there's two ways to measure dawn. Ideally, you should go with 72 minutes, which is the later time. However, if someone's really pressed, it's going to be very challenging for them to recite Shema that late. They could push it all the way up to 90 minutes before sunrise. Okay, next week we will continue with the Rav Moshe's tshuva, and we'll get into more of the details of putting everything together. And practically speaking, someone's got to get to work. What do they do with the talis? What do they do with the tefillin? When do they put it on? When do they make the bracha? When do they recite Shema? And we're going to take everything we learned in the last 3 weeks, and we'll put it into practice. So that's the plan for next week. Okay, thank you everybody for joining. It was a great class as always, and I wish you a wonderful night.